The morning of my granddaughter's christening, I stood in my own kitchen, holding a casserole dish I'd made from scratch, and my daughter-in-law looked at it like I'd brought a dead raccoon to the table. "We're doing a different theme now," she said, "vegan." I should have texted you. She hadn't texted me. She'd had 3 weeks. My name is Linda Whitmore. I'm 58 years old, I live in Mississauga, and for 34 years I have been the kind of mother who shows up. Not the loud kind. Not the kind who posts about it. The kind who remembers which grandchild is allergic to what. Who drives 40 minutes in February slush because somebody needed a hand. Who keeps a folder. An actual paper folder, because I am old enough to still trust paper. Of every birthday, every appointment, every small important date that belongs to the people I love. My son's name is Patrick. He's 32. He married a woman named Holly 4 years ago, and I want to be fair here, because fairness matters to me even when it costs me something. Holly is not a villain in the simple sense. She is smart, she is driven, she runs her own little skincare business out of a rented studio in Oakville, and when she first came into our lives she was warm to me. Genuinely warm. We used to text about recipes. She called me Linda. Then she called me Mom once at a Thanksgiving, when she'd had 2 glasses of wine and got emotional. And I remember thinking, this is going to be a good thing. It took about 1.5 years for that warmth to start curdling into something else. Not all at once. Slowly, the way milk turns when you're not paying attention and only notice when you go to pour it. It started with small corrections. The way I held the baby. Too tight apparently, when Maeve was born. The way I packed snacks for outings. Too much sugar. Never mind that I'd raised 2 children to adulthood on considerably more sugar than that, and they'd turned out fine. Holly had opinions about everything, and increasingly, those opinions came with an undertone that I wasn't quite sophisticated enough to understand modern parenting. I let most of it go. You pick your battles when you want to stay close to your grandchildren. That's just the math of it. What I couldn't quite let go of was the slow erosion of my place in the family calendar. It started subtly. I'd hear about events after they happened. A birthday party I wasn't invited to because it was just close friends. Except 3 of Patrick's cousins on Holly's side were there. Posted all over Instagram, eating cake under a banner that said Maeve's first birthday. I told myself it was an oversight. I told myself a lot of things. Patrick, for his part, has always been a peacekeeper. He was that way as a boy too. The one who'd apologize for things that weren't his fault just to keep the room calm. I love him for it, and I have also, over the years, watched it cost him his spine in small increments. He loves Holly, he loves his daughter, and somewhere in the last few years, he stopped being able to see when the 2 women in his life were not being treated the same way by each other. The christening was supposed to be different. Holly had asked me, months in advance, if I would help organize the reception afterward at their house. I said yes immediately. I have organized every family gathering of consequence for over 3 decades. I know how to do this. I know how to make a room feel warm and full without anyone lifting a finger except me. I asked Holly's what she wanted. She said, "Just do what you do, Linda. You're so good at this." I took that as trust. I see now it might have been something closer to convenience. I spent 3 weeks on it. I made a traditional Irish-Canadian spread because that's our family's background on Patrick's father's side. And because Maeve's middle name is actually Bridget, after my own grandmother. I made soda bread from my grandmother's recipe. Written on an index card, so worn the ink has gone soft at the edges. I made a ham, a proper trifle, little savory tarts. I ironed the good tablecloth, the one that's been in our family since my own christening, and I brought flowers because Holly had mentioned offhand once that she liked peonies, and I'd remembered. I arrived 2 hours early, the way I always do, to help set up. The house was already full of caterers. Not friends helping. Caterers in black aprons, unloading trays of something green and architectural looking onto the dining table where my trifle was supposed to go. I stood there with my casserole dish in my hands, and Holly came down the stairs in a cream dress, looking lovely, looking entirely unbothered, and said the thing about the different theme. Vegan, plant-forward, more in line with where we're at as a family now. She said it lightly, like she was telling me they'd repainted a room. "I should have texted you," she said again. Already turning away, already greeting someone at the door. I want to be honest about what happened in me in that moment. Because the honest version isn't dramatic. I didn't cry. I didn't raise my voice. I felt something very quiet and very cold settle into my chest. The kind of feeling that doesn't announce itself as anger, because it's gone past anger into something more like clarity. I thought, she knew. She had 3 weeks and a phone in her hand at all times and she knew. And she let me drive over here with a ham. I carried my casserole dish back out to my car. I didn't make a scene. I came back inside. Because it was my granddaughter's christening. And I was not going to let Holly take that day away from Maeve, whatever she decided to take away from me. I sat through the church service in the second pew, behind Holly's parents, who had been placed in the front pew alongside Patrick and Holly. That seating arrangement, I would learn, had been very deliberate. I held my composure. I watched Maeve in her christening gown, the one I'd had cleaned and pressed, the one that had been worn by 4 generations of girls in our family, including me, and I let myself feel something true and uncomplicated for a few minutes. Love for that baby, full stop, no asterisks. At the reception, I was polite. I complimented the caterer's presentation. Because credit where it's due, the food looked beautiful. Even if it had displaced a ham, my own mother would have recognized. I made conversation with Holly's mother, a woman named Carol, who I have always found pleasant enough, if a little oblivious to her daughter's sharper edges. Carol mentioned, almost in passing, that Holly had been stressed about getting the aesthetic right for the photographer. The photographer, that was the detail that caught, the way a splinter catches before you even feel the sting. There was a hired photographer there, a young woman with 2 cameras and a quiet, watchful manner, moving through the rooms capturing candid shots. I hadn't been told there'd be a professional photographer. I don't know why that detail bothered me more than the food, except that it told me something. This wasn't a casual gathering that had simply evolved past my offerings. This was a curated event, and somewhere in the curation, I had been quietly demoted from contributor to background extra. I want to tell you about a conversation I overheard, because it's the hinge of this whole story, and I didn't go looking for it. I'd gone into the kitchen to refill my water glass and get a moment away from the noise, and Holly was in the pantry just off the kitchen, with her friend Vanessa, a woman I'd met maybe twice. They didn't know I was there. The pantry door was half open and the kitchen tile carries sound in that house. I've always thought, ever since they renovated. She was going to make it some sad casserole situation, Holly was saying, laughing a little. I just couldn't have that in the photos. I told the photographer specifically nothing too, homie. You know what I mean. Vanessa said something I didn't catch. I mean, she's sweet, Holly said. She's just very, Linda. You know, Patrick doesn't see it because he's her son, but I'm not raising Maeve to think a ham and a tablecloth from 1995 is what hospitality looks like. I stood very still in that kitchen, 58 years old, holding an empty water glass, listening to my son's wife describe 4 decades of my care as an aesthetic liability to be managed around a photographer's lens. I didn't go into the pantry. I didn't say a single word. I filled my glass, very calmly, and walked back into the reception. And I want you to understand that the next 2 hours of my life were some of the most disciplined acting I have ever done. I smiled. I held my granddaughter. I let Carol tell me about her cruise. I did not let one muscle in my face betray what I now knew. Because here is the thing about being underestimated your whole life, by people who think your quietness means you don't notice things. I notice everything. I have always noticed everything. I simply choose most of the time not to make noise about it. That is not weakness. People confuse the two constantly, and it has cost them more than they know. I drove home that night and I sat in my kitchen, my real kitchen, where the casserole dish now sat cold and untouched on the counter, and I thought about what I wanted to do. Not out of spite. I want to be clear about that. Because the version of me that exists in this story is not a woman plotting revenge. I am a woman who, for the first time in a long time, decided to stop absorbing things quietly and start being honest. The same way I've always told my own children to be honest, even when it's uncomfortable, even when it might cost you something. 3 days later, Patrick called me. He sounded off, careful in a way he isn't usually careful with me. Mom, are you okay? You left kind of early Sunday. I told him the truth, not in an explosion. Calmly, the way I'd tell him anything else, the school project deadline, the dentist appointment. I told him about the casserole, about the caterers, about overhearing the pantry conversation. I didn't editorialize. I just laid it out, fact after fact, the way you'd read a grocery list. There was a long silence on the line. Long enough that I asked if he was still there. I didn't know about any of that, he said finally. I thought the food thing was a last-minute vendor mix-up. She told me the caterer showed up with the wrong order. She had 3 weeks, Patrick. Another silence. I heard what she said. About the homie thing. I hadn't told him that part yet. I'd told him I overheard a conversation, not the specifics. What do you mean you heard? It turned out Vanessa, the friend from the pantry, had a conscience that outlasted her loyalty. She'd called Patrick 2 days after the christening, uneasy about something she'd seen. Not what Holly said in the pantry. She hadn't heard all of that, but what came after. After I left the kitchen, apparently, Holly had turned to Vanessa and said something else. Something about how if I made a fuss about it later, she'd just say I was being sensitive about getting older and less involved. And that Patrick would back her up because he always did. Because keeping the peace meant keeping it with her, specifically, not with both of us equally. Vanessa had felt sick about it. She told Patrick she thought he should know what kind of conversation his wife was comfortable having about his mother. I felt something in my chest loosen slightly when Patrick told me this. Not vindication exactly. Just the relief of being believed by someone whose belief I'd needed for years and rarely fully gotten. I need to think, Patrick said. I need to talk to her. I told him to take whatever time he needed, and I meant it. I wasn't interested in forcing a confrontation or extracting an apology through pressure. I have learned, at this point in my life, that apologies extracted through pressure aren't worth the breath it takes to say them. What happened over the following month, I learned mostly secondhand. The way you learn the weather report for a storm that's already passed through somewhere else. Patrick confronted Holly. She denied the pantry conversation at first, the way people do when they're caught, minimizing, recasting, telling him he was taking Vanessa's word over hers. But Patrick, for the first time in longer than I can remember, didn't back down. He told her he wanted to know the truth about the catering switch, about the seating at the church, about whether any of it had been deliberate. Holly eventually admitted some of it, not all of it. People rarely admit all of it, even when they're caught, but enough. She admitted she'd decided weeks earlier to go a different direction with the food and hadn't told me because she didn't want the conflict of explaining it. She admitted the photographer comment, framed as an offhand joke that got blown out of proportion. She did not, as far as I know, ever directly apologize to me for the pantry conversation itself, the line about what kind of hospitality she was raising Maeve to value. I think some part of her still believes that comment was simply true, and therefore exempt from apology. The way people sometimes believe cruelty stops being cruelty if it's accurate. What changed, and what mattered more to me than any apology, was Patrick. He started showing up differently. He called more. He started including me in decisions about Maeve, in a way that felt less like courtesy and more like genuine partnership, asking what I thought, not just informing me after the fact. About 6 weeks after the christening, he came to my house alone on a Saturday afternoon, sat at my kitchen table, the same table where I'd written out the soda bread recipe 100 times for other people, and he said, "I think I let you become invisible in my own house, and I didn't even notice I was doing it. I'm sorry, Mom." That sentence did something the casserole couldn't, the pantry comment couldn't undo. No caterer's tray of architectural greens could touch. My son saw me. After everything, that was the thing I'd actually been hungry for, more than credit, more than an apology from Holly, more than vindication. I wanted my son to see that I had been there, consistently for 32 years, and that being quiet about it didn't mean I hadn't noticed every single time it went unacknowledged. Holly and I are civil now. We're not what we were in those early warm years, and I've made peace with that. I no longer organize her events. I'm invited, I attend, I bring something small and unremarkable, and I let other people handle the rest. It's not coldness on my part. It's a boundary, the kind I should have set years earlier, the kind I'm only capable of setting now, because I finally stopped mistaking my own usefulness for my own worth. I still have my grandmother's index card, the one with the soda bread recipe gone soft at the edges. I made that bread again last month, for no occasion at all, just a Tuesday, just because I wanted to. I ate it warm with butter at my own kitchen table, alone, and it tasted exactly the way it always has. Like something true that doesn't need anyone else's approval to be worth making. If you've ever had your quiet, steady love mistaken for something embarrassing by someone who couldn't see its value, I want you to know this. The people who underestimate quiet women usually do it because they've never had to develop the patience that quiet requires. That patience isn't weakness. It's a long game, and most people who play it short don't realize, until it's far too late, that they were never actually winning.